So, an interesting story, an article I want to go over today from Politico saying, or at least the title is How Labour Let Nigel Farage Win. Now, we've been through this before. When you look at the last election, that is the 2024 election, it's really not that long ago since we had it, but it almost bears repeating. What was the point of that election? It wasn't to beat Farage, wasn't to do anything else except to defeat the Tories. That was the election message, and the one that went out loud and clear. If you want to beat the Tories, you got to engage in tactical voting. And the two parties that if you want to beat your Tory in your seat, your vote was either going to have to be Labour or probably the Lib Dems. And we are hearing, by the way, that the new Lib Dem conference, they plan at the next election to squeeze the Tories even more. They want to make the blue wall down south their brand new backyard, their new home. They want to make it, well, I'm going to coin this phrase now. They want to make it their own yellow brick road to power. Will they be able to do it? Potentially, yes. And there's a lot of people going, oh, but you've got to worry about reform, got to worry about reform. Here's the thing. Remember, the Tories and Reform competing for exactly the same voting bloc. They will eat each other because our system, our first past the post system, does not allow parties like that have competition to do very well. And remember, at the end of the day, it's not about votage percentage. It is about how many seats you win. And this is what I've always said, and I've tried to make it very, very clear whenever we've done this. Whenever we've gone over, like, oh my God, Tories freak out about Reform UK, I always bring up the fact, how many more seats did they lose to the Lib Dems? Their biggest threat is not Reform UK, it's the Lib Dems. And yet, no one in the Conservative Party even wants to acknowledge that, trying to say, as Robert Jerrick has suggested very recently, that if he wins, he is going to go to war against Farage. We'll see how well that works out for him. If he wins, of course. But before we do go into this, because I do think this is quite interesting, and again, it sums up really the last election. And I think it has some very interesting info, from some Labour insiders. All very interesting indeed. But as we've always said, that election in particular, going to be poured over extensively for a lot of reasons. But we'll see what happens when the multitude of books end up coming out about it, because you can guarantee very soon, if not in the next couple of months, if not maybe in time for Christmas, a lot of books written about the 2024 election. So before we do get into this, please do remember to click on the like, the share button, and of course, remember to hit, slap, whatever, the like button. Click on the subscribe button as well. Also, we are, click on the Patreon page. There's the Buy Me a Coffee link where you can buy me coffee. Definitely need one this morning. And of course, as always, there is the YouTube thank you button. And of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. Leave a comment down below as well. That always helps. And let's crack on then into this. Coming from Politico, the title of How Labour Let Nigel Farage Win. So, don't let your values get in the way of your victory. This was the ruthless calculation Keir Starmer's election-winning campaign team made when deciding how to deal with the new hard-right force in British politics, Nigel Farage's Reform UK party. Starmer's election masterminds knew that Farage's entry into this year's contest would do far more damage to the right-centre Conservatives than to his Labour Party. And it absolutely did. They were 100% right on that. Yep. Reform ate a lot of the Conservative votes, and you're going to see some very interesting statistics later on. Because remember, the right wing in this country has always, when it's come time to vote, who do they vote for? Instantly Conservatives. However, remember when UKIP were around, what were the Conservatives so worried about? Oh, it's UKIP pulling votes away from us. Because they've never ever had proper competition like we have really in the left and center. You've got, Liberal Democrats, Labour, Greens, etc., etc., etc. So there is never been any real true competition. And really, Reform UK, for the first time ever, put that serious competition into them. And even then, with the Reform UK, this prognosis that Nigel Farage is somehow going to win the 2029 general election, there's no evidence that that's going to happen. There's no evidence at all that's going to happen. Especially when you look at how Farage is treating Clacton for the past couple of months, not even being there as a constituent MP. And it's already highly annoying a lot of people in Clacton. Remember how we said Lee Anderson managed to retain his seat in Ashford after all the polls were saying he's going to lose his seat? It was because after he got kicked out, he actually went and started working as a constituent MP, and the people of Ashford, rightly or wrongly, again, you can argue that till the cows come home, decided to give him a second chance as a Reform MP because he went and did constituency work. And bear in mind, that's how a lot of other Conservative MPs managed to survive, by running as a local Conservative, constituent MP. That's how a lot of them managed to survive. We went over that excessively in the run-up to the last general election. So let's continue with this. So with that, of course, in mind, they then ordered their candidates and even teams on the ground not to even waste their time trying to fight Farage, even though they regarded him as toxic for his populist, anti-immigration and anti-European politics. It was a case of your enemy's enemy, one senior Labour official disclosed. I agree. Why the big enemy to beat at the last general election wasn't Farage, wasn't Reform UK, it was the Tories. And if they're going to eat up some of that Tory vote, why try fight them on this? Why try and beat them on that when they are going to damage the Tories? You may not like that strategy, but sometimes it's right. The enemy of your enemy is your friend. And certainly the last election, that proved to be true. So it continues. It is not obviously a very healthy development for the British politics to have Nigel Farage rampaging around the country, whipping up division, a senior party aide said. But we also knew that in terms of the election, the biggest loser from this is Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. He's right. He's right on that. Sometimes in politics, you have to be ruthless. You have to make these calculations. Because in politics, you've got to be ruthless. People might not like that, but it's true. Sometimes you've got to be ruthless. So the decision was, of course, typical for the very ruthless focus that characterized Starmer's election operation. Morgan McSweeney, Labour's campaign director, studied the methods used for devising, used to devastating effect by the doyen of the Conservative strategist Lynton Crosby to deliver a Tory victory back in 2015, deploying Crosby's playbook for relentless messaging discipline, relentless and focus. McSweeney orchestrated the most efficient campaign in history, winning more than 60% of the seats in Parliament with just 34% of the vote. And yet, that was true in a general election campaign. Messaging, discipline, focus. He got it 100% right. 100% right. Where, again, I bring up Corbyn. Look at how Corbyn's message was being delivered. Look at the messaging discipline. Look at the focus. Look at the resilience of the messaging that was being put out. Wasn't the same. Was not the same. And yet, you can't argue with the results. 60% of the seats were just 34% of the vote. And remember, votage percent does not matter. It is how many much seats you win. And Labour got 60% of the seats in Parliament. That's how you win an election in the UK. It's bums on seats. So, insights, of course, into Labour's campaign strategy are then revealed in Landslide, the inside story of the 2024 election, a forthcoming book. Well, surprise, surprise, I said the book's coming out of the July vote. It propelled Starmer's Labour to power and ended over 14 years of Tory rule. The author spoke to many individuals involved in all major levels of the party, many unconditional of anonymity to reveal sensitive details about the campaigns. The result of Labour's decision to give Farage a free pass was dramatic. Some analysis do suggest that Sunak's Conservatives lost as many as 80 seats in Parliament because of Farage's candidates split the right-wing vote, allowing Labour to win. 80 seats. 80 seats they lost because it split the vote. As long as Reform stick around, that split on the right stays. That stays a lot. And one of the things I keep on wanting to bring up is look at the voting population. Look how they are moving away from right-wing ideas and policies. Look at the fact that social conservatism is dying in the UK. Well, liberal, what do they call it now? Liberal, something or other. We did a video about it. Damn, can't remember off the top of my head. But like liberal, like economics and sort of socialism is becoming more and more of a thing. People are more accepting of those ideas. You look at how the fact progressive ideas are vastly more popular in the UK than right-wing ideas and policies. Fundamentally, the UK is in a mass transitional state when it comes to politics, a mass transitional state. So a lot of very interesting things in politics are going to be happening over a long, probably the next 10, even 15 years because of this big population change, this big change in a lot of factors. So a lot of very interesting things in politics as well, because obviously how the population sort of reflects that going to change fundamentally a lot how politics itself. So there's going to be a lot of big changes over the next couple of years. So back to this. So if Reform votes, of course, had gone to the Conservative candidate, Starmer's majority would have been significantly smaller. In the end, of course, Reform UK won 4.1 million votes. That's 14% of the total cast and 5 seats in Parliament. And Farage, personally, it was, of course, a breakthrough moment, winning his first seats after multiple failed attempts in the past. Well, he doesn't seem really interested in any seat, to be honest, even though he's finally won one. He now has, of course, set his sights on trying to overtake the Tories, who fell to their worst ever defeat. And he's even suggested that Reform could win the next election in 2029. No evidence to back that up. That could either happen. So that was, of course, quite the score for Farage, who initially wasn't even supposed to be a candidate. When Sunak called the election on the 22nd of May, it took almost everyone in British politics by surprise, including the Reform leader. Initially, Farage said he couldn't stand because he wasn't ready for a campaign, even admitting that Sunak's snap election had caught him off guard. But less than 2 weeks later, he had changed his mind. When the news filtered into Labour HQ at 4:15 on the 3rd of June that Farage was about to announce his candidacy, Starmer's team stopped what they were doing and huddled round the TV, as Farage confirmed that he would be taking over the Reform UK leadership and standing in the Tory-held seat of Clacton-on-Sea. Labour's aides gave each other fist bumps in delight. McSweeney, Starmer's election director, broke out into a wide smile. Morgan's face was just a picture of one of those present, they said. Many of Starmer's now senior strategists, including McSweeney, did regard Farage's presence in the national debate as poisonous, that they would far rather he had no platform at all. But they put aside their distaste for Farage's politics and embraced that helping hand to defeat the Tories and allow Labour to win. According to another senior Labour official, the party was now deliberately trying not to make reform credible. Moving forward, that will not be sustainable. And they are right about that. I am glad that they do acknowledge this, that actually, yeah, we've got to attack, reform on this. We've got to sort of make sure that, if someone says this about reform, that you've got attack lines that you can put on them. I'm glad to see that is actually being said, that going forward, that's not going to be sustainable, that attacking reform, etc., good thing to do. And bear in mind, pointing out that most of their MPs are not really that good, not really that useful. Richard Trice, exactly not doing his job either. We haven't talked about that a lot, about what's going on in Tice's seat as well. We'll do something about that in probably over the next couple of weeks as well, because, like I say, his constituents not happy either. He's not doing his job. So back to this. And of course, asked if they regretted not fighting harder against reform, one senior Labour politician said, "No, I don't think so. We knew pretty early that Farage was going to win in Clacton. I think our messaging was right." And that's another thing. You look at Clacton, because there was a whole thing about the Labour candidate being told, don't bother in Clacton. That was because, and we can now see, they knew he was going to win in Clacton. Why put resources into a fight you're not going to win, where you can put it elsewhere? Again, sometimes in politics, you've got to be ruthless. You've got to make ruthless choices and focus on where your resources are going to be the most useful. So during the election, an undercover investigation by Channel 4 also found activists now spouting racist and homophobic comments as they worked on Farage's campaign in Clacton. One of them, Andrew Parker, was recorded suggesting that migrants arriving on British smalls and small boats should be shot as target practice by the army. He also referred to the Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, as can't say that on YouTube. Another reform official also called the Pride flag degenerate. Farage also said at the time he was, quote, dismayed by the report's comments from a handful of people associated with my local campaign. He said that the individuals concerned would be thrown out. Farage did later suggest that Parker, a part-time actor, may have been part of a setup by the broadcaster, a claim that Channel 4 News denied. That was, if you remember that, this wasn't real. This was all a setup by Channel 4. These people were paid actors. No, they won't. And of course, Sunak, the main target of the racism, this episode was very upsetting, especially as his own two daughters had now witnessed the racist slurs. He said, "It hurts, and it makes me very angry." Sunak said that he had repeated the offensive terms and said that he'd been used on TV. This is all too important for us to now clearly call out for what it is. Reform UK also came second in 98 at the UK's 650 parliamentary seats. But for the Labour election bosses, the key battle is still with the Tories. Starmer's team point out that there are 100 most marginal seats. The Tories are now in second at 82. Think about that. What crossover is there between those reform seats where they came in second and those seats where they're like, our marginal seats are these 100 where the Tories came in second? We've got 82. How much crossover is there when you've already seen earlier on in this that 80 seats they lost because Reform UK were actively taking part? That is a monumental number. And as we've said, will continuously, as long as Reform UK are around, this permanently splits the right-wing vote. And it's something that the Tories have long worried about, but that nightmare is now a reality. How are they going to deal with it? Bear in mind, before someone says, oh, but they could join with Reform UK. No, they won't. That will destroy the Tory party. They will destroy the Tory party. It will split them in two completely. Anyway, this continues. So I'm not in any way compliant about that kind of politics, said the senior Labour quoted politician from the above. The riots that broke out in the cities in England over the summer gave Farage an added opportunity to try and rally support. Reform are obviously very much a factor in UK politics, and they will try to now capitalise on grievances. I am not saying that the next election is going to be the same battle as the last. That, I'm glad to say, is the case. And bear in mind, 2029 is a long way off. A long way off. So to say who is going to win the next general election, we don't know. We just generally don't know. You won't really have a sense about that election really until maybe 2028, maybe even later in 2028, when people actually start polling about that, when people actually start thinking about the general election and so on. So it's going to be some time before we even really think about what is going to be fought. And of course, the UK, who knows what will change between now and then. So it's just impossible to really predict what the next general election is going to be, because you're trying to look at 5 years into the future. And sometimes in that, you can't really cast that bigger, longer net on some of that stuff. Luke Terrell from, of course, More in Common, which ran focus groups during the election, said that Labour's refusal to fight Farage was, quote, risky. While Reform won most of the votes among people who would normally back the Tories, Farage also stopped Labour winning back voters who supported Boris Johnson's Conservatives in 2029 in the former industrial heartlands known as the Red Wall. So that is something that for the next election, they have to seriously consider. One of the things they have to do is really look how they can improve stuff up here in the north. This is a big, big factor, and how they intend to do that. So the industrial strategy that we know is sort of in the pipes coming down the line somewhere really has to have a good focus and look at focusing in on the north, having a look at how all that's going to sort of play out. So he also said a good chunk of those Tory voters that Reform took were parts of people who had at some point voted Labour, said Tyrrell. I think it has now left Labour on a far shakier ground in places like the Red Wall than they would other had been had they targeted Farage directly. So at least I'm glad they acknowledge that, because that is certainly true. The other, of course, major danger for Starmer is that Reform is in second place in 98% of the seats held by Labour. And of course, Farage's party is already now rising in the polls, Tyrrell said. If Labour lose a couple of percentage to Reform and the Tories don't get their act together, you've got this whole swathe of seats now at risk. And again, that is true. What happens to the Tories over the next couple of months, if they get a new leader, if they can actually get their act together, then yes, they can act as very much a bulwark against Farage. Reform and the Tories will constantly be fighting, eating each other's vote. But also at the next election, Labour has to go after those Reform voters who were part of the Red Wall, who voted for, Johnson in 2019, who, bought up all that stuff and not. They've got to sort of win those voters. And they've got, 4 years to do that. So that's a lot of time, but also it's not a lot of time either in many ways. So back to this. Labour's, of course, decision not to fight Farage was, quote, quite a short-term approach. And of course, it risked dragging politics further to the right and away from Starmer's progressive priorities and now immigration and tax, Tyrrell said. I understand the glee that it would have, of course, felt about seeing their opponents suffer because the Farage threat emerged. I am just not convinced that it ultimately benefited Labour as much as they think it did. Well, I would say the proof is in the pudding. And I would say winning over 60% of the seats in Parliament did a lot of good. But the next time we go to a general election, you can't ignore Reform. You've got to think how you win those voters back, how you bring those people back in to sort of voting Labour again to really shore up those seats. And also, when we get there, what state is the Conservative Party going to be in? You know, have we really been through those multiple, you know, leadership battles? Have they actually got their act together? Can they actually properly see Farage off to a point where they just eat each other? And they're sort of really battling for whatever the right wing vote is. Remember, it's about 25% of people identify as right wing voters here in the UK. But as we said before, 35% identify as centrist, and of course, 25%, 24% identify as left wing. So there is a lot at play, and we don't know necessarily what the political landscape is going to necessarily look like in 2024. We don't know what stuff is going to happen by then. Who knows? It is a long way off, but at the same time, it's not. But I am glad to see that you do see those Labour people saying, you know, next time we have to target Farage. We can't ignore him. So that is very, very important. A Labour Party spokesman for the party said, to try and put forward a positive message to change our country and rebuild our economy after 14 years of Tory chaos and decline. The British people loudly endorsed Labour's positive plans for all across the country. And with their mandate, we are now beginning to see the hard work to try and fix the foundations to take the first steps towards change. Again, they've got a lot of time between now and then to sort of really start to implement that. We're already seeing Parliament actively busy, very much so compared to previous, where MPs used to claim about being bored because there was pretty much nothing for them to do because the Tories had just given up practically for a year, not doing anything. It had become very much a zombie parliament, just lurching on in the hope that, you know, there wouldn't be another disaster come their way or a scandal or something happen. But at least we've got Labour in and they are putting bills forward. They are doing stuff. So obviously the next big one is going to be what happens in October, in the budget. We'll see what gets announced there. But there's a lot of work to do. We always said that, you know, winning the election was just a first part. The next part, and that's the hard part, is actually trying to fix all this. You know, trying to fix 14 years of you know, bad Tory government. A lot of work to do indeed. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.